Hello.
Oh, it worked. Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to Lost in Space, how UNLV soared into a modern space management system. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, there you go. I'm Jennifer McCarthy. I am the Executive Director of Space Management at UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I have 24 years experience in higher education and 18 years experience in space management.
And I am Heidi Albrecht. I am the Associate Director of Space Management at UNLV. I also have 24 years experience in higher ed, with 18 of those in space management, working with Jen.
Been together a long time.
So a little bit about UNLV. UNLV was founded in 1957. We have about 200 buildings, which sit on about 7.5 million gross square feet. We have 350 acres. There are 30-ish thousand students and 3,500 faculty and staff.
So today what we wanted to do is outline how the Office of Space Management at UNLV developed and implemented processes and policies to provide a transparent and consistent structure for space allocation, data collection, and reporting over the last 20 years. So we're focusing on the areas of data management, drawing management, and governance. Our presentation is probably about 30 minutes, but then we left lots of time for discussion and questions. And so we wanted to first talk about what our staffing was and where we started. So in 2001, we were actually called Academic and Research Space. We were created with two goals: to manage projects and track academic and research space. We report to the provost, so we're on the academic side, which is different than a lot of space management offices. And it started with a director and an administrative assistant. It eventually grew to 6 staff of an executive director, director of space management, director of data resources, analyst, program officer, an administrative assistant, and 2 student workers. So we were going along, building up our program and everything, and then the recession hit, and we were drastically reduced down to an executive director, program manager, and a half-time space planning analyst, who the half-time person was actually one of our student workers who had just graduated and didn't have a job. And so we were able to retain him that way. So now we report to the Vice Provost for Decision Support, still under the academic side of the house, and there's 5 of us. So it's Heidi and I and 3 space planning analysts. One of them is still that student worker from way back when. So we have a lot of historical knowledge within the department.
Your favorite
Yeah,
guy.
this is my favorite little guy. So to keep with our little theme of space, here's a little astronaut. And this is just showing a bunch of our responsibilities. You know, we're all juggling those balls in the air of what we're trying to manage. So we handle drawing management, projects, field verifications, reporting, space surveys, moves we throw in there, you know, everything. We do a little bit of everything.
All right, so now we'll talk just a little bit about where we began. When the office started in 2002, we used a variety of systems to track our space. As you'll notice, really none of those are space management systems. We used Excel and Access for our room records, SIS for classroom information, AutoCAD for the drawings, and Facilities was using TMA for some of their space data, and they're still using TMA today. All right. So as I just stated, for data management, our room information was compiled from various sources: the registrar's office, facilities management, planning and construction. The departmental information came from human resources. And keep in mind, as Jen said, we were just tracking academic and research spaces across campus, nothing else. For drawings, we were provided drawings by the Planning and Construction Department. They gave us a set that we would update if we found issues out in the field. We would give them those updates, but it was up to them if they decided to update their set of drawings. Yeah, we're good. In governance, at this time, we had no formal data governance in the beginning, which meant that building codes varied from system to system, and there was no format in place to categorize space. We were making space assignments basically based on who asked first, or sometimes just the loudest.
So then over the next 4 years, we started looking for a different space management software. We needed a better solution than Access. And we ultimately landed on Archibus. And in 2006, we implemented the desktop version for space only. Our data during this time was becoming much better defined, and Student Affairs was seeing what we were doing, and they asked if they could start adding their information to our data, which is when we started getting the student workers to help support that. At this point, academic and research space was assigning space when it was requested, but more people were learning who we were. As part of the implementation, we outsourced polylining of the drawings so that it would interface with the Archibus system. But there were multiple sets of drawings. So we had our set of drawings, which was the copy of Planning Constructions. Planning Construction, of course, had theirs. OIT had their own version of drawings, and then you had the different departments that sometimes had theirs. So we had a science and engineering building who had their own set of drawings. Student Affairs had their own set. So nothing was very consistent at this point. But we started using FICM for the space categories, but that was just within academic and research space. We had very little buy-in or support from our primary stakeholders and collaborators. Nobody really understood what space management was, what we did, and why we needed to be there. We did establish a space committee, but there was no formal process as part of that committee. It was pretty much our director at the time would go in and say, here's what we're going to do. Does everybody agree? And,
of course.
And everybody did, and we went on from there.
So then in 2008, we upgraded to Web Central, the web-based version of Archibus. This version would ultimately allow our end users to have access to real-time space data. At this time too, because our data was improving, OIT started becoming interested in the information we were collecting and trying to figure out how they could use it for their purposes as well. But we still had multiple sets of drawings all across campus. And since we still didn't have any formal governance practices at this time, there were also different gross square footage numbers that were being used for reporting, depending on who was doing the reports and where they were gathering that information from. We did discover that some of the discrepancies in the GSF was because planning, construction, and facilities were polylining their drawings based on BOMA standards. In academic and research space, we were polylining based on FICM standards, so that was creating some of those discrepancies across campus.
So around 2010, so about 10 years later, 10 years later, we started working with human resources and took the data from the HR system and imported it into Archibus. So this also allowed for our departments to update location information within Archibus, and then that fed back into the HR system, which then fed into the employee locator. This was really helpful because the HR system would let you put in, there was no validated table. So basically you could put anything. I could call my building Queen Jen, and that's where they thought I sat. there was no security access, so anybody could put themselves in the president's office if they wanted to.
Did you call the building Queen Jen?
I tried.
She
I really
tried.
did.
We said no. No.
So by having the information now within the space management system, it really did allow for us to better track and validate the data and made sure that employees were only located in space that was allocated to that department. And at this point, we started to have the building code start to match across the various systems. yet we still had multiple sets of drawings. So as part of governance, planning, construction, facilities management, and academic and research space started to notice, PNC and FM started to see, oh, well, we do have all these different building codes, building names, who's responsible for it. So we created a process, and PNC was ultimately the group that designates the building codes and the building names, and TMA started to have the same ones. So we started to have a little bit more governance within the space world.
Then in 2011, 2012, a new iteration of the Space Committee was formed. This committee started establishing processes for how space would be requested, that the request would come through academic and research space, ensuring consistency and giving everyone across campus the same opportunities when requesting space. We also at this time implemented building tours. So our space planning analysts would go out on campus and tour all the space. They would be verifying the floor plans and the category assignments, that those were correct. We'd be updating those in our drawings and giving them to PNC. But as we've already learned, that didn't always get updated everywhere. And just as a side note, when we do tours, which we still do today, it takes us about 3 years to tour our entire campus. And when they're finished, they start all over again. So in the area of governance, a campus-wide space policy was approved by the administration that required departments to submit those requests to the committee if they wanted to make any category changes or structural changes to the spaces that were assigned to them. We also at this time established a numbering system for modular spaces versus hard offices. For example, if an office had hard walls, it was given a room number with a letter, so like 123A or 123B. But if it was a modular or cubicle space, it was given a -01, so 123-01. This made it a lot easier when we were looking at the data or at the drawings to know if they were real offices with hard walls or if it was a cubicle or modular space.
There you go. So around 2013, we did another upgrade, and we created 3 different space surveys as part of that process. So the first one was for the indirect cost recovery proposal. We would pull in the research data from the research system, and we were also pulling in the research expenditure data from our financial system. So that was one survey that we do every 3 to 5 years. We also created a departmental review survey, which this allowed for the departments to, on a rolling basis, they complete an annual survey, which if they keep up with their data throughout the year, they should just be verifying it. We try to tell them before, hey, make sure all your people are in the right space before we open up the survey. It'll be a lot easier. So that they're familiar with functional use codes. We also ask them to update their functional uses for their research spaces so that when it comes down around to the indirect cost recovery space survey, they already know about it. It's not that we're just teaching them that every 3 to 5 years. At this point, we're also able to put employees in multiple locations. This was a game changer. We now knew which faculty members were in their research spaces. We also knew which faculty members had 2 or 3 offices assigned based off of where they were. So we had a much better handle on where our space was and where people were. Property control implemented asset management within Archibus at this point. We had multiple sets of drawings still. Yeah. As part of the building tours, we started adding photos to the room record. So they would take a picture of every single room. We'd add it to the room record within Archibus. And we also found an issue with the initial polylines. So our consultant had basically taken our high bay areas, and that second floor area was counted as assignable square footage, and Yeah.
Oops.
And that's where part of our gross square footage discrepancy was from. It wasn't all of it, but that was part of it for certain buildings. Also, at this point, end users were noticing a difference between the drawings in our system and what they would get from planning and construction. And ours were up to date, and the ones they were getting from planning and construction were not. That was starting to cause more and more problems with the departments and us. So at this point, planning and construction decided to become more invested in what we were doing, and we got to the point that we decided that they would update their drawings first, and then we would update the archivist drawings. But we needed to track that. So what we did was we created a drawing management field where after the buildings were toured, we'd put a date and what the problem was with the drawing, and then PNC had a list that they could go look at and know what changes they needed to make. And we were also, if we were asked for data, we could say, oh, we know there's a problem with this. We know this wall was torn down, or in some cases there are entire wings of a building that we didn't have drawings for. So this helped improve a little bit. And at this point, we basically had started getting all the data for all space on campus. So we had a name change to space management since we weren't just tracking academic and research space.
And then in 2015, the Nevada System of Higher Education, or NSHE, adopted Workday for human resource and finance functions across the entire system. Space Management, our office, of course, worked with NSHE to develop and implement connectors for the Workday feed of employee location information. One of the reasons that we lobbied for archivists to feed this information into Workday was because, as Jen mentioned earlier, there were no security profiles in the HR system that would limit individuals from putting themselves or others into other people's spaces. So let's see, from there, because you went through all that. Let's see, during this time, asset management was abandoned by property control. They moved into Asset Works. And the Office of Research, the vice president at this time, decided that they no longer wanted to pull their expenditure data into Archivist, so that was taken at that point as well. But in good news, trust started building between our office and planning and construction, and they started allowing our office to make minor updates to their drawings for a little bit more consistency across campus. There were still multiple sets, but it was getting a little better. So in governance, we established field definitions, and due in part to the implementation of Workday, the campus started establishing and recognizing systems of records for certain data elements. So for example, Archivist is the system of record for location information, while planning and construction is the system of record for building names and abbreviations, and room numbers, those sorts of items. And at this point, facilities also started using the square footage numbers from space management for their reporting. So there was becoming more consistent reporting numbers as well.
And about 4 years ago, we started getting more in-house resources. So a lot of our changes as far as workflows, behind the scenes, changes to like add a field or something like that to Archivist, we had to use our consultant. And what we did was we got a half-time FTE from OIT to help us with that. And we hired a space planning analyst who was more techie than most of us. And he was really eager and learned a lot. He still is. And he's great. And he goes in and he's figured out how to create metrics and home pages and a lot of things that we wouldn't have been able to do. So that's helped our in-house resources for the reporting and system updates. At this time, we did our last upgrade since then, and the big change for this was we had the ability to look at our drawings within Archivist, and the departments could see who was assigned to the space, but they could also make the changes within the drawings to the space. And then our biggest win is we created an MOU with planning construction to use one set of drawings. So
Thank you.
yeah.
We feel the same way.
So they'll update their drawings and Archibus, and we'll do the same. OIT still has their own for network. We didn't solve all the problems, but planning and construction's drawings are the system of record. So us using the same ones was a really big win for us. And then the administration decided to add a new process into all of this. So they created the Campus Planning Priorities Committee, which is basically a group that reviews any project over $50,000. And what it is to basically determine whether or not there's both the human resources, the fiscal resources, and whether or not it's a priority on campus to move forward for an estimate. We were hearing that there are a lot of fishing expeditions for deans and departments asking, can you do this? But they had no idea of what the cost was. So now this group supports it. They'll find an estimate, it comes back, and we review it again to see whether or not it's still a priority to move forward with that project. And in some cases, we fund some or all of the project. This was done out of Smartsheets. It was all a form that they would fill out online, and it would go through that process. Most CPPC projects also need to go through Space Committee, especially if it's a renovation. So what we did is we joined the Space Committee process with the CPPC process. So if you create a Space Committee request, it'll go through the process. Once it's approved, the status change is final approved, it automatically triggers the workflow to start the CPPC process so that we don't have to wait for the end user to recreate the same request for a different process.
All right. And that brings us to 2020. So for data management, like everyone else, it was COVID. We took this time to try to figure out how to work remotely and how to become more paperless with our files. For drawings, COVID, but because campus was closed and we were not allowed to do tours during this time, we were able to spend more time in drawing management and get those drawings better up to date and work on that backlog that was created. And for governance, so just before the shutdown, we had gotten space standards approved, but then it was COVID.
So now we're to today, and we're going to use this time to talk about a couple of the initiatives that we've started. Some were started right before COVID, and some have been created because of it, and we'll talk a little bit about what we think some of our wins were. So our current systems are, we have more systems than where we started. What's not here, we forgot to add, is our scheduling system uses 25 Live. But instead of DOS-based student information system, we're using PeopleSoft. There's just we have more systems, but they seem to talk to each other better. And then, as Heidi had mentioned, right before the shutdown, we had spent pretty much all of 2019 working with planning construction facilities, registrar's office to create space standards for certain room categories. And those can all be found on our website. They're pretty much out there. But the goal of the space standards was to allow for us to be consistent in our processes and to help with decision making and establish trust amongst the departments to keep that consistency. So what you're looking at on the screen is just a summary of our office space standards. We had reached out to several of our peer institutions to see what they were using as far as standards. Not many campuses seem to have a lot of standards or didn't at that point. But we did the best we could to benchmark, and what our cabinet chose to do is they didn't want us to say that, faculty only had 110 square feet. They wanted it set that we had no more than square footage. So this would be your top level. So if you have 70 square feet, that's where you are, and you're under your level, you're still within that standard. Yes?
I can't read the slide, so could you perhaps give us a couple of the categories
Of course. Mhm.
on the left.
So for an assistant associate director, we're saying no more than 130 square feet. The standard FTE for this for this position is 100, 100%. And we also put what the preferred office type was. So for this group, it's office. To go down to a dean or related is what we're calling it, or a chief that's in their title, we have 170 square feet and also within an office space. So that, okay. Yes, you're welcome. So that's just our summary. When you go into the system, what we did for every job class code is we assigned a standard for that. So we did go with the top end for what it is, and I don't know how well you can see this one.
Guessing not.
Okay. So what it is for each position, you're able, and the person in the position, you're able to see what their current FTE is, what their current allocated space is, what the standard is, and then the difference between the two. It also shows what the preferred office type is and what the actual room category is that they're in. We're able to export this into Excel and by department and be able to see where the deficits and the surpluses are. One of the things we're finding when we meet with the deans to just talk about this, if we're moving them into new space or programming new space for them, is we're trying to stress that they should be looking at the position and at the role and not the person that's in the position. So just because, you may have, I'm going to use an admin as an example. We would have an admin in a modular space. The admin's been with them for a long time and been in an office. A lot of times they're like, well, this person needs to be in the office. And we say, well, do they need a private office because of what they're doing, or is it because it's this individual? And so we really ask them to look at that when we're doing that. And we also ran into another situation that there were two directors that get along really, really well, and we're programming new space for them, and they said, well, we can share an office, it doesn't matter. And we said, well, if you're both not here, would you want to share with somebody else? And they said, oh, we don't know. And so we said, well, maybe you should follow the standard and each have a private office in this case. But of course, remember, we put this all in place January 29th, 2020, and the world's changed. So, yes.
Do you have any particular allowances in case somebody has like a dual role? I mean, I'm sure your university is organized so nobody has dual roles.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Extra workload that they're officially given. But do you have any allowance for this in your standards?
We would go with what the highest role was. So if they're faculty member and chair is probably one of our easiest to use, is they would get what the chair square footage is what we would aim for. I don't know. When we first started, the chairs would have their faculty office and their chair office. We're not able to do that anymore. There's just not enough space for it. So there is a chair office, but I think they just move in and out.
Yeah, they rotate through.
So.
Do you have a sense of what your compliance rate is on the standards?
100, they're perfect.
Well,
Everybody-
They're amazing. No.
Well, here's the big problem with the standards is that buildings that were constructed 20 years ago had larger office spaces. I think our engineering building average office size is 170 square feet for a faculty office, and we're saying 110. So we weren't going to go back and right size it, and we knew that. This is just moving forward as we're programming new buildings. This is what we're looking at. It's challenging though because we're programming a new building now, and we're saying I think they have about 130 square feet. We're saying 110, and trying to even shrink their offices more to have more student service spaces within the building. It's really hard. Yeah.
They think they're going to do shiny building, therefore that'll mean better space or bigger space for them. And
Well, it is better, but it's not bigger.
Right. And that's what we keep.
Maybe not
Right. And we keep explaining we're trying to tell everybody, there's so much better furniture solutions that can make your offices appear bigger. It's not. Yeah. But that is a challenge where we are running into.
Oh, yeah.
All right. There we go.
All right. Okay, so another thing that we recently implemented across campus is what we're calling building resources. These are shared conference rooms or office spaces that any employee is able to reserve. We've got all of these resources within Google Calendar, so anyone with a at unlv.edu email address can go in and make these reservations. We've worked with our lock shop to make sure that each individual only needs to order one hard key or have one code added to their proximity card so that they can access any of these spaces that they reserve anywhere across campus. We're finding that these are good options for increased utilization in conference rooms and having the space available to the employees that are going remote or have hybrid work agreements that are very helpful.
And when programming new spaces for conference rooms, we're trying to shy away from conference rooms being within a enclosed suite. We're trying to ask that the access is off of a main corridor so that more can use that space. So a little bit about what we feel works for us is transparency. Anybody with a single sign-on access has access to Archivist. They might not see everything, but they're able to see all the floor plans. They're able to see how many seats are in a classroom and who it's assigned to. So they have a lot of access.
So in addition to these standard users having access to view that basic space information, we also have a system set up with specific security roles that allow individuals in departments or division to ask for additional access, which will give them more granular information to the spaces assigned to their areas. These roles are requested through an online form, and once that's granted through their department and through our process, they're able to see more detailed information, like what you may or may not be able to see up on the screen. So they're also able to see, like, from the drawing, the individual that's assigned to the space, and by clicking on that room they're also able to update those employee assignments right here in the drawing. So in this slide, you also really can't see, but it's another view. It's another view of the granular data that these individuals see. So this one has just more information about the square footage, who it's assigned to. I'm even having a little trouble seeing it. Yeah, Wayne?
When a user puts in information, does it just go straight into the system, or does it have to go to you for approval?
It goes right into the system for their employee locations. Yep.
Yeah, they can only update employee locations within this.
The location, their phone number, their mail stop, and not even their email. The email is fed from IT. So certain pieces of information are locked down, but for their location. So if they moved you swapped offices with someone else, they can go and that will update the system right then. Yep, we don't review that. So you'll also notice on this slide that maybe on the left-hand side, there's a little image button. And like Jen was saying earlier, if you click on that image button, we do have photos of each space that we have in the system, so individuals can go and look at these photos. It helps a lot of people that aren't real familiar with floor plans. They can get a better sense of what the space that they're looking at, and it helps for us too. Sometimes we don't have to go out into the field to see what's there, what's in the spaces. The photos are updated on the building tours. And one thing I missed on that other slide, there's also on the right-hand side, there's a little gear button up there where the individuals can customize that view within Archivist. So if they want to reorder the columns, they can do that if they're looking for specific information. They also can export their information either to Excel or to a PDF if they need it.
So we're also able to, one of the things we've done is we've created a lot of metrics and quality control measures. So we're able to see if there's an error with the employee import. Sometimes, especially since Workday, I see somebody smile about Workday. So,
That was me.
yeah. So sometimes with Workday, with the supervisory organizations, they're not coming in very clean. And so sometimes we have some employees that error out. So we're able to see that really quickly versus having to wait weeks to realize that our import wasn't working. So that helps us. We're also able to, and the deans are able to see how many employees are missing location information, how many vacant office there appears to be, because if they don't update the data, we don't know. And we also are tracking how many vacant research labs there are and where they are. And that's just really improved our data.
Yeah, so as Jen said, we just feel that providing accurate and relevant data helps support decision making across campus. The information we keep in our system is used from the upper administration all the way down to the department chair level, so it's accessible to all.
And the main thing that we learned is that collaboration is key. So taking that space, people, location information, and all those quality control measures, it's really important for us to collaborate with the departments, planning, construction, real estate, facilities, human resources. You know, all of us working together is the only way that's making this successful. We do have challenges, so even with the changes with the drawings, there's still challenges. We'd like drawings updated and much quicker than they are, and part of it's the process of when we get the as-builts from the contractors. So, you know, hopefully that'll improve at some point. We also, as I just said right before this, the standards do not reflect the actual space available. So that is one of our challenges, and the data is only as good as those providing it. Yes?
What we did, we had a similar situation as you had.
Oh.
What we did was we had the contractors give us a space allocation plan.
Mhm.
We did that when construction starts.
Uh,
They give us the as-bills and anything that's changing, then we can update it. We thought that was easier because we had the drawings in the system and everyone else can get access to it while it's in construction.
Interesting.
Just go back and update it.
Interesting. Thanks.
Thank you.
So moving forward, we want to explore Revit, BIM, though after seeing a lot of the presentations the last 2 days, I want to explore GIS. We'd like to reporting improvements. There is a mobile app that some of our police services are using. You may have noticed on our floor plans, we have the north orientation arrow. That was a request from police services, and they said that's helpful. And we do have the emergency preparedness module, and we'd like to implement that. Some of the pieces that are needed for it, nobody really owns the business process. There's a lot of just handshake deals of we're doing a favor for you, and so we're trying to get that in line in order to implement emergency preparedness. And then any questions? Lots.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just gonna ask, how much of it, when you acquired our bus, did you use out of the box versus customized?
So we've customized quite a bit. However, a lot of what we customized is now out of the box. So every time we do an upgrade, we're trying to shift back to out of the box. Our space survey is probably the one thing that's customized the most. And every time we make a change, we have to ask our business partner to make sure it's not going to break the survey. Our business partner, I guess, is now pretty much selling their own add-on of the survey, and it looks prettier than what ours does because ours is older, but it does the same, so we haven't changed that. But yeah, yes.
Thank you for the presentation, and this is really, what you're doing is awesome. So, I mean, the data is very important for the university. I'm curious who holds the units accountable in the event that, because you're showing data, right? They're not meeting your standards. I saw staff administration on there with a 250 square foot office, so who's ultimately holding the units accountable, or how are you working towards that ultimate goal of standardization?
Right now we're having a hard time because we're trying to figure out what these hybrid work schedules are.
Right? So
Right.
shared office in the future.
So it depends. I mean, this person in the 250 square foot office, we're looking at who's in there. I didn't look at who it was, so depending on who it was, it again, if it's an administrator in a space, we're not going to move them out of the building and add a wall and make it smaller. I mean, so there's nothing we can do for the space that's already constructed. But if we're moving them, we can go in that direction. As far as we have not started looking at how many are hybrid and remote. We were asked to hold off on it for about a year, so we're getting to that point that we're trying to figure. We're trying to figure out. I think we all are trying to figure out what do you do with remote. We actually gave up our offices for space management last month. We've shrunk down to one space where we have moved supplies, a printer, master keys, and all of that, and then we're using the hoteling offices or a conference room because I'd say 90% of the time when we're on campus, we're out in the field.
Yeah.
So we're trying it to, because before we can ask anybody else to do it, we want to see if it works for us.
Yeah.
And so far we like it. We're also hybrid though. We have to be local. We're locally remote. So, but
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think it's really nice you have this data, but it becomes more complex when you look at exactly, you say COVID now, and I would argue a 250 square foot office, you might not do anything, but you can pull the furniture out, turn it into a conference room.
right.
I just suggested that the other day.
Yeah, and we have done that with a couple
you
too.
repurpose it,
Yeah.
where now it's a shared office for 3 or 4 people.
Exactly.
Or a hoteling option.
Right.
That you fix with furniture rather than modifications.
We're really short on student study space, so that's one of the things we're trying to encourage departments as they're looking at their space. And we're saying, well, do you need all these offices? Can some be shared? Can you convert them to make this work? Can it be study space? For your students. If it's a really large space, could it be a class lab? What's needed? So we are looking at that piece. One of the things that we didn't show here is we do have a remote work policy, and it goes through HR. So we did create a view for human resources where they update the data within the system to show how many days they're remote, if they're hybrid, if it's 100%. So we do have that data. We just didn't show it here. We're also not sure that everybody is submitting the form, because we're hearing that there's different perspectives from various areas on campus. Even though there's a remote work policy, we're not sure how many are actually submitting the form. So I don't know if that helped.
Yeah.
So,
Other questions?
You said you do your building tours, a 3-year rotation. Are there any buildings that you do yearly?
No. No, but we will if there are major renovations. We're asking the project managers, because they take photos at the end, if they can share those photos with us so that we can upload them. And if they say no, we go and take photos of those spaces as well. So if we know, we gave up our offices, like Jen said. We had some really nice sit-stand desks, and we decided to put those into a lot of these hoteling offices to make them a little bit more desirable to people. And so I had one of our space planning analysts go out last week and take new photos so that when someone's looking at the space and trying to decide which one to reserve, they can get the nice swanky desk. So we do spot update, but not full building tours, no.
And as our data is getting cleaner, we're going through the building tour process. So we were at 4 to 5 years, and we're down to 3. My goal's 2, and they're trying really hard to do that.
Yeah.
But then we had more buildings, so that's not helping.
Not really, no. And on different campuses too, so yeah.
Yeah. So, any other questions?
Anybody?
Yeah.
So collect data from all of the departments ongoing. If something changes, they're supposed to go in and update it. Is that how you?
For the employees or for like the room categories?
Well, for both, because you collect both of those.
So the employee data, they update as they make the change in Web Central. That's what they're supposed to do.
And is that
Well-
a workday and then it goes into your system,
No.
or vice versa?
So we get a feed from Workday of the employee, their employee number, their position, department, that basic HR data, everything pretty much but location,
Right.
phone number, and that comes into Archivus. the employees update it or the departments update it, and then that feeds back up into Workday.
So the benefit for the department to update their employee information is that information, once it's updated in Archibus and fed back into Workday, that goes into the online directory. So if your office moves and no one updates that information, your students are going to the wrong place, they're calling the wrong phone number. So the departments are pretty good about updating that information right away when it happens, because it is what's showing on the online directory for each individual.
And is that across the board, both academic and administrative
Yes.
groups?
Yep.
Yeah, and only the primary location goes into Workday. I did want to.
Right, and into the directory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the category, if there are category changes, those requests go through Space Committee, because the end users, even though they have access to see all that data, they cannot update a category change within the system. They have to let us know, and we do that in our office.
And you mean a space type, a room type?
Yeah,
Yep.
because
Mhm.
Office.
Office to
Um,
conference room,
office to
break
break
room to lactation room, whatever it happens to be.
And we had one situation. What triggered this to have the space policy is one of the departments wanted to remove a sink and everything from what was a break room to make it an office. And this was during the downturn, and we said that's a lot of renovations, and are you going to ask for it to go back when you have more staff? How is this going to work? So there are those types of things that we wanted to review first and make sure it made sense. Or, we do have one now too, that they're trying to change an office to a break room, and we're questioning it because another department within the same college is asking for more office space. So in that case, the dean's office should be saying, no, this office needs to go to this other department. So we're able to manage that a little bit.
Who sits on your space committee?
So Heidi's running it now.
And what roles?
So we have a rep from facilities, faculty senate. So we do have a faculty rep, research,
Student
affairs, information technology, planning and construction, and registrars.
academic affairs.
And academic affairs. So, and that's also all
That was
on
quite
our
a test.
website. And space committee process now is pretty much entirely electronic. So we haven't had to meet in a long time.
Yeah, you can ask a lot of questions or put in information within Smart Sheets, and then that's all just fed.
Commenting tools.
Yep, the commenting tools, and then once everybody has all the information that they need, or even when we send it out to vote, you have 3 days to vote if they have more questions, and you can ask. Your vote can be request in-person meeting, and then we invite the person who requested that information to come and state their case.
So it's recorded in Smart Sheets.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
In the comment tool, you have a separate sheet to track.
There's a comment, right, that they're able to put a comment that the committee members can put the comment in. So, yep. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the timeline and, starting back in 2006. Before that, you probably didn't keep record. I'm just impressed that you guys have that incremental, increase
We've been here a long time.
each year. And it lets people like me that's just starting that process see how long it's going to take to get to a point where everything is a little,
Yeah. I think our department motto should be patience, grasshopper. Patience.
So I appreciate that. That's
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you very much.
What?
Oh.
Good.